And hey everybody, this is Geocacher TN Fuddbug. Welcome to the Friday of fall break up here in beautiful, absolutely gorgeous Camp Winnipeg in Massachusetts. Sorry for the shakiness. We had a very peaceful night's sleep, which is good because coming up on the bus, it was a little harder to get good sleep. But anyway, it's a beautiful morning today. I'm really excited about all that we're doing. Our main state of interest today is New Hampshire. We're going to be going up there, visiting the Uriah Smith home, Hastings Potato Patch, the Washington, New Hampshire Church, maybe the Hazen Foss Grave, I'm not sure. So I'm definitely going to be seeing a lot more cool Adventist historical spots, and I will certainly take you along with me. So yeah, come along with me as I spend another day, exciting day, traveling New England, visiting Adventist historical sites.
Welcome to the birthplace of Annie and Uriah Smith. As you go through the house, you'll be seeing through windows that they look through, walking on the floors that they did. So I think that by experience working at Mount Vernon, at George Washington's home, people have a special feeling when they walk in the footsteps of your pioneers. And of course, when you think of Annie and Uriah and all they accomplished in their lives in this small little village, someone was talking about computers, and can you imagine how they would be today? They were just so smart and brilliant, aren't they? So come on in. We're going to turn right into the common parlor. This was a tavern. It was like an inn in those days, where you would stop, the stagecoach to stop on its way, you know, to other destinations, and people would stay, have something to eat. So their bedrooms, the common parlor is where they had the bar and the little tables. On the other side is the ladies' parlor for tea later on. So we're going to go into the common parlor. So the common parlor, they cut out on the floor is where the bar was. There was the bar right in there. When we bought the house in '79 and only lived here 2 years, and then we had to rent it out while, you know, we were away from 17. And then when we returned, we went room by room, kind of trying to do some restoration. And in this room, the floor needed to have some repair, but trying to, if you put new pine wood next to the old, you can't really stain it the same way because it's so different. The old pine is heavier, has much more oil in it. So I had the brilliant idea of painting it a dark mustard. And after my husband put 3 coats of mustard on there, I came in and thought, oh, I can't stand it. And it was too late. He said, we're not doing anything on this anymore. And so I had been at Mount Vernon, I saw how they did this faux finish on some of his cabinets and walls to make pine look like walnut. And I had watched the process, so I thought, well, maybe I can do this on this floor. And I think it worked out pretty well. There's some spots, especially in the beginning, it doesn't look too good, but as as the month went by, I got a little bit better at it. And so I started doing this graining on window seats and stairs upstairs. Yeah, they had to almost take the brush away from me because I was going around everywhere. But, you know, it does have that nice appearance. Also, when we took up these floorboards, underneath there's a big beam and it's charred about a fourth of the way through. So there had to be some really, you know, horrendous fire here. And that's probably why they put the granite hearth here, you know, so that, because using all these fireplaces, 8 fireplaces in the house. The records of the town records were destroyed at the fire, so we don't know a lot of what was going on at this period. It would have been really fascinating to have all that. So look through these old windows. You see the curly ones here that are all weavy. Those are the same windows they had. There's a door at the end of this little path here that for the handyman. And the handyman's entrance was there, rickety stairs to a little loft, and that was the shed. So we have made that into a comfortable study and my laundry room upstairs, but that was all the handyman's section and a lot of the work that was done here. Any questions in this area? We're going to go through the study and then up to some bedrooms.
Is any question? Is any of the furniture original?
No, none of the furniture is original.
But it's for the time period.
Yeah, it's fairly correct for the time period, although I don't think they had as much, of course.
Okay.
You know, I'm sure that furniture was passed on from generation to generation, and then they would make things.
It does.
And here's a picture of a bridge that Uriah Smith helped build. That's right across the road from his and Annie's birthplace home. Also, here's a picture of a home just next door to their birthplace home, where I was told that, I knew this story was true, but the home where when Uriah was 12 years old, he contracted such a serious infection in his leg that he had to have it amputated by a doctor. And that happened in this home, and it was done in 20 minutes with no anesthesia, which of course would be quite painful, but that is what he went through. And I think it is really neat to see the home where this happened. Also, I think it is interesting, Uriah Smith went on to become a very prolific inventor, and he invented a much better fake leg or leg replacement than what had been given to him. So that was pretty cool. And hey folks, we have driven a little ways. We are now at a cemetery where the grave of Annie Smith, the sister of Uriah Smith, is buried. I believe right up there. Let's learn some more history about it.
All right, the students from Southern, they know where they're at. The rest of you, this is this is Wilton Center, New Hampshire. Cemetery at Wilton Center, New Hampshire. And we're in the Smith family plot. Again, I'm sure the students have heard all this because Dr. Lake, just said that he has given you an orientation. So I should let him give my group the orientation. Anyway, for the other groups, since we've been going through cemeteries, and I heard some questions the other day, just to let you know that there will be a center, and many of these there will be a center marker. That's the family marker. And then around it will be the graves of the various people that are in the family that are buried there. when we were in Gorham yesterday. I heard some people saying, well, what is that, and what is this, and what is this? And I didn't take time to tell you then. But so this is the marker for the family. The individual headstones will be right here. Father, mother, this is a little baby, Annie, and John. John, well, let's just have dispatch on the other two. There's a Samuel that's buried here, a sibling of Uriah and Annie Smith, and he's buried out here somewhere. He had a family. John never married, and he's buried here, this brother. So John is over here. As far as Annie and Uriah Smith are concerned, on our bus we haven't had a chance to talk about Uriah much, so we'll do that later today. But as far as Annie is concerned, Annie was born in 1828. She was a very bright young girl. She grew up with a mother that was religious and a father that apparently was not particularly religious. Samuel Smith, the father, Rebecca's the mother. And Rebecca Smith became a Millerite in the 1840s. So she's expecting the Lord to return sometime around 1843, 1844. I don't know much about their Millerite experience except that late in life, shortly a year or so, or even less I think than a year before Uriah Smith died, he wrote an article in the Review that gives an interesting anecdote of something that happened the night before October 22. So October 21, the Smith family went to a Millerite tent meeting somewhere in the area, and some hooligans, hoodlums, whatever you want to call them, came out and started to make trouble for the Millerites that were holding the meetings. And they began by throwing stones in under the tent, trying to hit the lanterns, the glass lanterns, to knock out the lights. And eventually they succeeded at doing that pretty well. So then they went to the next step, and that was to cut the ropes on the tent. So they lowered the tent down on these Millerites, and Uriah Smith said, and that wasn't insulting enough. What else did they do? They found a poor scared hog. Turned this pig loose under the edge of the tent. So here are these people that are trying to scramble out from under the tent. This poor scared, the stiff hog, you know, he's squealing around. He said it was not very conducive for a religious meeting. Anyway, so this, I mean, it just reminds us that the trouble, the difficulty, was not easy being a Millerite. But both Annie and Uriah, as far as I know, both of the other children, Samuel Jr. and John, were all Millerites, as was the mother. I don't know that the father was, never heard that he was. Now, as was mentioned over, I suppose, to both groups over there, the father was a civil engineer, so that's why he could afford a house like that place where Annie and Uriah were born. After the great disappointment of October 22, as happened with many, why Annie and Uriah both lost interest in religion. Annie, since we're talking about her now, Annie, being talented, as I mentioned, she decided that she was going to make something of herself. So she was going to get an education. And she went down to Boston, to a female seminary down there, to get an education. Now, this was unusual for a young lady in the mid-19th century to think she could actually make something of herself. But Annie was determined. She had that kind of a personality that she was going to be somebody, do something. And in fact, she wrote poetry, and she did some artwork. She had poems printed in places like the Ladies' Wreath, and I've forgotten there was another journal that she had some secular poems printed in during this era of the late 1840s, early 1850s. She also did paintings, and I'm sorry that it wasn't there for everybody to see today, but this is a painting that Annie Smith did that's still in the family. The original of this is still in the family. In fact, I should show you a color version of it. It's a nice big painting, and it is, according to the members of the Smith family, they think, I mean, the tradition in the family is it's a self-portrait. We have no photographs of Annie, so this could or could not be Annie, I don't know, but the family tradition is that this painting by Annie Smith was actually a self-portrait of this talented young girl. She also did at least one other sketch that I have a copy of here, of a cat. kind of a primitive style painting. I mean, she's not going to run Leonardo da Vinci much competition, but you know, it shows some talent, and she, as I said, she wrote poetry. Her mother eventually becomes a Sabbath keeper, along about 1850, somewhere in there, 1850. So how do you think, I'm going to ask my group, you better get this one right. Who do you think came walking through this part of the country and introduced Rebecca Smith to the Sabbath? Thank you. I'm glad they weren't even on my tour. I think I'm going to go with them. Judge, you want my group? You did better with them than I was doing with them. Joseph Bates, I told you, he went everywhere preaching and teaching. And so he came through here, and what was his question? Are there any former Millerites around? Sure, well, there's Rebecca Smith. Well, go over and introduce her to the Sabbath, the sanctuary, and the other things. And that's the way he did. So Rebecca becomes a Sabbath keeper. And she now has children who are not involved in religion. Samuel and John here, I don't know much about them. They may have been, but at least Uriah and Annie were not. Uriah's off at Phillips Academy and in Exeter, New Hampshire, and he's getting an education. And Annie's down in Boston, Charlestown, Boston suburb. She's getting an education. And the mother is very nervous and concerned about the spiritual condition of the children. And so Joseph Bates comes through one time, and he says they visit, and he says, she says, where are you going next? Well, I'm going down to Boston. Oh, will you look up my daughter, Annie? Annie's down there, and invite her to the meetings. And the old story says that Joseph Bates said, well, she doesn't know me. I've never met your daughter. Why would she come to my meetings if I invite her? Why don't you write to her? And why don't you invite her to come? And, you know, back in those days, at least, kids still did what their parents wanted them to do. I'm sure this group does, but not all kids in America do anymore. So, you know, so he says, why don't you write? And so that's what was agreed to. And so Rebecca wrote to Annie, told her about the meetings that were going to be held in the home of a Sister Temple, who was a Millerite Sabbath keeper by this time, former Millerite Sabbath keeper. And Annie thought she knew where this had the directions, thought she knew, and she'd go at least once to make Mother happy. She'd at least go once. So Joseph Bates goes to Sister Temple's house. Now, the night before the meetings open, he has a very unusual dream. He sees in his dream a young lady come in, sit down, come in late, by the way, look around and sit down. There's only one chair left in the room, and it's right next to the door where she came in. And she sat down, and it was indicated to him some way in his dream that he should change the topic of his sermon and preach on or speak on the heavenly sanctuary. Now, the interesting, amazing thing is that same night, the night before Joseph Bates' meetings were to open, Annie Smith has a dream. She has the same dream, but from the opposite end of the room. She sees herself coming into a room late, looking around. The meeting's already going on. There's one seat left. She sits down in that seat, and the man that's speaking is talking on the heavenly sanctuary. And she has no idea that, and he has no idea that the very next night, their dreams are going to be acted out. I've often wondered, this is not part of the old story, I've often wondered when when Joseph Bates, whatever he was talking on, when he shifted gears right in the middle, when he sees this young lady come in, realizes that he is supposed to change and talk on the other topic. I wonder if they even noticed he switched gears and went to a different topic. I don't know how smooth he did it. But anyway, the story is she and he got together, and this is 1851, and immediately afterwards, he gives her Bible studies, and within a week or two, she accepts the Sabbath, the sanctuary, and other things. And within just a short time after that, she writes a poem and sends it to James White, who was publishing the church paper, the Review and Herald, in Saratoga Springs. Volume 2 of the paper was printed in Saratoga Springs, New York, and so she sends it, "Fear not, little flock." James White, who had apparently heard, at least I don't know that he'd ever met the mother, Rebecca, but he'd heard of Rebecca and knew that she had a literary bent to her also, and finds out this is Rebecca Smith's daughter, writes back to Annie and says, come, help us with the paper. She says, no, I can't come. She says, I was straining, I have a problem with my eyes. Apparently she had been trying to do a skyline a painting of Boston, and it strained her eyes trying to see the details that she wanted to paint. And he said, well, come anyway, we'll pray for you. And there were some letters, I guess, went back and forth. And eventually Annie came, went to Saratoga Springs. And then eventually she went on to Rochester. When they moved there in 1852, she went on to Rochester to help James White publish the paper. And she was writing poems, and she was editing. Now when Annie joined James White, something happened with the review that he had never been able to achieve. That was to bring the review out on a regular basis, because he was the one-man show. So when he was there, the paper came out. When he was traveling, well, you just didn't get your paper for a few weeks till he got back home. But Annie doesn't do traveling, so when she's there, she could bring the paper out on a regularly scheduled basis every week. So that's what begins to happen now. The church paper becomes a weekly, and not just, well, it was supposed to be weekly before, but when James was gone, it didn't happen. So in a sense, she became the editor, the managing editor at least, of the paper. She never got that official title, but she was the one who produced the paper when James White was away. Now, there were some problems, though, that crept in back then. She wrote poems, and I just want to read you a few lines from a poem that she wrote about editing. If you've ever edited, maybe you'll be able to relate to this poem now. It's much longer, but I'm going to read a few stanzas. What news is this falls on my ear? What next will to my sight appear? My brain doth whirl, my heart doth quake. Oh, that egregious mistake! Too bad, I hear them cry. You might have seen with half an eye. Strange, passing strange, how could you make so plain, so blunderous a mistake? Guilty, condemned, I trembling stand, with pressing cares on every hand, without one single plea to make for leaving such a bad mistake. If right, no meed of praise is won, no more than duty then is done. If wrong, then censure I partake, deserving such a gross mistake. How long shall I o'er this bewail? The best, 'tis said, will sometimes fail. Must it then peace forever break? Summed up, 'tis only a mistake. The poem's much longer than that, but that's some excerpts from it. So most of her poetry that she wrote was, again, not great poetry, but it certainly reflected her spiritual values. Most of it was religious poetry, though she did write, you know, occasions like this. Now, who is she referring to here that was the taskmaster? I mean, the one that was noticing all the mistakes. Probably James White. I don't know, but probably James White. He had, let's put it kindly, he had a forceful personality. All right. Anyway, so Annie Smith is now worried about her younger brother, Uriah. Uriah's talented. The two of them had actually, before Annie accepted the Sabbath, the two of them thought they would go off and teach school together somewhere, and they were even offered a job. And so they were planning on going somewhere, and now she's accepted the Sabbath, and she's up there working for no money at all to help the message, to help proclaim the message. And what about Uriah? What can I do to help get Uriah to realize that he needs to accept the Sabbath and the three angels' messages and all? Well, he was an artist, and so she's there working on the review in Rochester by this time. And no, they're still in Saratoga Springs, I guess, at this time. Anyway, she gets him to do some woodcuts. Now, these are just photocopies of woodcuts from the March 23, 1852 issue of the Review. They're very primitive, admittedly, but they're interesting because they are the very first illustrations that ever appeared in a Sabbath-keeping Adventist publication. And they were done by Uriah Smith, who's not even a Sabbath keeper yet. But Annie's working under the hypothesis that if I can get him involved, I can get him across the line. And eventually, in September of 1852, he does accept the Sabbath, just shortly before his father died on December 1 of 1852. Now, some things that happened as they moved to Rochester, and tuberculosis came, we'll be talking about in our group, we'll be talking a lot more about that when we get to Rochester, but tuberculosis got into the midst, probably when Nathaniel White arrived with tuberculosis. And these young people in their teens and 20s who were producing the paper, giving everything they had basically for just room and board. Every time one of them would die, Annie would write a poem. And it would be published in the review along with the obituary sketch, the life sketch, about whichever one of these young people had died. Well, tragically, in late 1854, Annie herself began to cough. And of course they thought it was probably a cold, but before long they realized that she had contracted tuberculosis herself. Now back in those days they really didn't have a good cure for tuberculosis. So Annie decided to come from Rochester back here to West Wilton, to where her mother was living. Her mother was a widow by this time, so probably not in that house. She'd have been living somewhere else, but wherever she was living. Annie came back here. There were some water cures she went to. She was trying her best to recapture her health. And it wasn't working. Nothing was working. She was getting worse. She got the idea that if she would gather all of her poems that she had written, all of them together in a little book, either this book would be the impetus to get her back towards health, or it would be her last contribution to the church. And so she's gathering together many of her poems to put out in a little book of poetry. Her brother, Uriah, who by this time has become a Sabbath keeper, and he is working in Rochester with James and Ellen White, he travels back here to where his older sister is dying. And did I bring that? After I got it? Yep, I did. And he helps his sister arrange her poetry in this little book. And he promised her, he brought along a woodcut of a peony flower, simple little woodcut, and he promised his sister that this flower would be on the title page of her book. This was Annie's favorite flower. Whether or not she lived to ever see it, he promised that it would be there. Now the book of poetry, Annie's poems, is quite rare to start with, and most people, if they do see it and see this little flower on the title page, have no idea that it is a tribute of a younger brother, a tribute of love from a younger brother to his older sister. She did not live to see the book of poetry come out. It came out the next summer, just shortly after she died. Oh, before we leave though, I've got to read one last thing. I mentioned that when these young people would die in Rochester, who wrote a poem? Annie. Well, 2 days before she died, she wrote a poem, and it is included with her obituary in the review. And here is her poem, the last poem that she wrote. Oh, shed not a tear o'er the spot where I sleep. For the living and not for the dead ye may weep. Why mourn for the weary who sweetly repose, free in the grave from life's burden of woes? I long now to rest in the lone quiet tomb, for the footsteps of Jesus have lightened its gloom. I die in the hope of soon meeting again the friends that I love, with him ever to reign. So she wrote her own poem that was printed with her obituary in the review when she died in 1855.
And there was one who left behind the cherished friends of early years, and honor, pleasure, wealth resigned, to tread the path bedewed with tears. Through trials deep and conflicts sore, yet still a smile of joy he wore. I asked what buoyed his spirits up. Oh, this, said he, the blessed hope. Well, thank you everyone so much for watching this video of me traveling New Hampshire, getting to visit all sorts of cool Adventist historical sites, especially those relating to Annie and Uriah Smith. Hope you enjoyed it. Watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Be sure to check out more of my videos at youtube.com/TNPhotobug. And until next time, this is Geocacher TN Photobug signing out, and I am most definitely having a blast with the past.